All right, let's dive into one of history's biggest, most fascinating puzzles. We're talking about a guy who was a product of a revolution that got rid of a king only to turn around and make himself an emperor. Yep, you guessed it. We're talking about Napoleon Bonaparte. So, picture this. It's 1804. It hasn't been that long since the French Revolution. The one that famously overthrew the monarchy in the name of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And then, something totally wild happens. Napoleon Bonaparte, a celebrated general from that very same revolution, puts a crown on his own head. So what gives, right? How does a movement that was all about fighting absolute rule end up creating a new one? Well, you have to remember, after years of revolutionary chaos, people in France were just exhausted. They were desperate for some stability, for a strong leader to come in and restore order. And Napoleon, the military hero, he seemed like the perfect man for the job. Still, it feels like a total contradiction. So let's unpack how it all went down. To really get a handle on this, we've got to look at the two sides of Napoleon. Was he this visionary reformer pushing Europe into the modern age? Or was he just another power-hungry conqueror? The answer, which is what makes him so interesting, is he was both. This is really crucial. Napoleon didn't see himself as just another king. No way. In his own mind, he was a modernizer. He believed he was the force that was destined to drag Europe out of its old, feudal past and into a much more logical, streamlined future. And to be fair to him, he had a pretty strong case. His government rolled out some truly groundbreaking reforms. He introduced laws to protect private property, which was a huge deal for the middle-class supporters of the revolution. He also standardized weights and measures using the decimal system. I mean, think about it. It was a logical, scientific approach that just swept away centuries of confusing local systems. These were really modern ideas for a modern age. But of course, and there's always a but with Napoleon, there's the other side of the coin. For all his reforms and modern ideas, Napoleon was, at his very core, a military man. And his number one tool for spreading his vision was, you guessed it, conquest. And this was the fundamental conflict of his entire rule. On the one hand, his armies were sometimes seen as liberators. They were spreading revolutionary ideas and getting rid of old feudal systems. But on the other hand, they were invaders. He conquered neighboring countries, kicked out their royal families, and put his own relatives on their thrones. So yeah, it didn't take long for that welcome to wear out and for his forces to be seen as an occupying army. As history has shown us again and again, empires that are built on sheer conquest tend to be pretty fragile. And Napoleon's grand project? Well, it was about to come to a very dramatic end. One single year really marks the end of this whole era, 1815. This was the year the curtain finally came down on Napoleon's ambitions. He was finally and totally defeated at the legendary Battle of Waterloo. With that one loss, the man who had dominated Europe for over a decade saw his entire empire just collapse. His rule was over. But here's the twist, and it's a big one. Napoleon, the man, may have been defeated, but the ideas he helped spread, they weren't. They were very much alive, and believe me, they were about to reshape the world. Napoleon's empire was pretty short-lived, but his impact was anything but. Through all of his conquests, he had, maybe unintentionally, become the biggest messenger for the French Revolution. He had planted the seeds of liberty and modern law all across Europe, and those seeds were now starting to grow long after he was gone. So what were these powerful ideas? Well, they were the most important legacy of the French Revolution. We're talking about huge concepts like liberty, the call for democratic rights, and getting rid of those old feudal systems for good. These ideals spread from France to the rest of Europe and completely reshaped societies for the next 100 years. And this impact wasn't just limited to Europe. Not at all. The idea of freedom went global. Colonized peoples all over the world took this concept of liberty and they reworked it, using it to power their own movements for independence and to create their own sovereign nations. And we can see specific examples of this happening. In India, you had influential thinkers like Tipu Sultan and Ram Mohan Roy who were directly responding to and engaging with these radical new ideas of freedom and rights that were coming out of France. The ripples of 1789 were felt thousands of miles away. Which brings us right back to our paradox. Napoleon built this huge physical empire, and it crumbled into dust. But in the process, he spread a set of ideas that went on to inspire democratic movements and new nations all across the globe. So, I'll leave you with this question. Which is more powerful in the long run? The emperor who builds an empire, or the idea that outlives it?